you can see on screen there. So these focus areas include strengthening collaborative solutions to specific sustainability challenges, improving how schemes approach assessment and how they respond to sustainability risks, how kind of supporting schemes advance in how they monitor performance and how they report on progress on critical sustainability issues, how schemes and sustainability initiatives can add value for broader stakeholders, including governments, supply chain companies, and producing enterprises. And then finally, how sustainability initiatives can really enable smallholder market access and shifts to sustainable production. And this has been a real key theme throughout this week at the Forest Legality Conference about how we can ensure that smallholders are still included in supply chains that are increasingly being regulated. And the Innovations Fund is supported again by SECO, the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, and also by the UK government through their UK International Development Arm. If we go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So onto the Risk Information Alliance. So this is one of the projects that we have supported through our Innovations Fund. The project lead for the initiative itself is the Sustainable Biomass Programme. And in terms of project partners, we have the Forest Stewardship Council, who are here in the room today with us, Preferred by Nature, again, who are here with us, and also another sustainability scheme called the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. In terms of who they are, what they do, I will let them introduce themselves and the initiative, but just in terms of how the Risk Information Alliance really links to our funding focus areas, three key things to pull out. The first is that it's a collaborative effort. It's schemes that are working in similar supply chains, but also in different supply chains, coming together to look at how they develop risk assessment methodologies, sharing in resources, sharing in technical expertise, and ultimately trying to develop more coherent and cohesive risk assessment methodologies and approaches. Again, this is an initiative where they're really looking at empowering users to assess and respond to sustainability risks. And then finally, the last link to the fund focus areas is really around adding value. So the Risk Information Alliance, they're developing risk assessment methodologies and approaches that will not just empower the schemes that are involved, but also broader stakeholder base. These are tools that will be applicable beyond just these certification schemes. So with that, I will be, if we go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. I will be handing over to my colleague, Matteo, from FSC to introduce himself and introduce Forest Stewardship Council.
Thanks, Josh. And good afternoon, everybody. Also, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to the one in Zoom. I was supposed to stand behind the podium, but this is the last session of this wonderful event. So I'm going to be here with you. So we make sure that we have highest energy. So good to see you all. My name is Matteo. I'm the FSC EU Affairs lead based in Brussels, moving more and more into the global arena. Pleasure to be here. And before starting, just to have a temperature check. So how many of you have heard the word FSC? Okay, great. How many of you know what FSC means? Right? Good to see you, Chip, there. And how many of you have seen the FSC logo on products? Okay, so my introduction should be really short in this case. So just very, very briefly, FSC is the pioneer of forest certification scheme. We were born in 1994. We are not only a forest certification scheme, we are much more than that. So we do forest stewardship, and our mission is to make sure that we have resilient forest for all, forever. Just some numbers. This year we celebrate our 30-year anniversary. We have 150 million hectares of certified forests worldwide. So we're a global forest certification schemes, and we have around 1,200 plus members. And they're really critical for us in order to achieve the mission that I just explained before. They are critical because our membership is structured as it follows. So we have 3 chambers. And our members are divided in 3 chambers. We have economic chamber, the social chamber, the environmental chamber. So together, they co-create the most robust standard for sustainable forest management. Just to stress on this point, because we're going to speak today also later on sustainability legislation, our standard, they don't only encompasses the environmental aspects, but also the social one. We had indigenous people since Monday here. Just wanted to stress that our standards also include the social protection, not only with regard to workers, but also with regard indigenous people, and in particular, the FPIC, so the free, prior, and informed consent. We also have an FSC Indigenous Foundation, which is an independent organization based in Panama, and their goal is actually to create new solutions so that indigenous people can keep protecting their lands. In terms of where we are, we're a global organization, so we're basically everywhere. This is a picture of our one of the latest global staff meetings. So every year we gather together in Germany, in Cologne, and essentially we gather and we discuss what could be some solution for forests for the future. It's a very nice picture that I always like to show, and that also demonstrate our commitment. And that's exactly what we are. So we are not only an idea. What distinguishes us is that, if you want, we're a strange animal. We are not an NGO. We are not a company, but we're also all these things together. And what we do is try to bridge this aspiration to action, because we are present on the ground. It's a very brief explanation about FSC. Happy to answer question more. And I will now hand over to my colleague Jennifer, Sandra, sorry about that, who's going to present Preferred by Nature. Sandra, floor is yours.
Thank you, Matteo. Hi, everybody. So a little overview of Preferred by Nature. I'm not going to ask the same question than Matteo did for FSC. I'm sure we are less known, but this is a just overview of who we are. So Preferred by Nature, we are an international, mission-driven international organization, Danish-based originally. And what we're doing is supporting our stakeholder in their sustainability journey by linking them from sustainable production at the landscape level and linking them to the market through a sustainable supply chain. So we're trying to connect the sustainable landscape to and create market pool at the market side. And in which sector and in which commodity are we working? So we're trying to focus on 3 main sectors, the forestry, agriculture, and travel as well, the sustainable travel. And currently our work has been focused on the commodities that you're seeing here: timber, coffee, cocoa, palm oil, soy, rubber, biomaterials, cattle, beef, and rice. You see that the majority are the AUDR commodities. Those commodities are those with the major environmental and social impact. And talking about risk, we have accumulated now a good expertise, I hope, in working in these commodities and in these sectors as well. So how do we aim to do that? By linking sustainable production to sustainable market. It's actually through 4 pillars. We do work and deliver certification services. Actually, we act as a CB, right, as a certification body. I'm going to show in the further slides all the certification schemes we are accredited to deliver. But we also do have an advisory division where my colleague Jennifer works, and we are supporting our partners and companies in their sustainability journey, which doesn't lead directly to the issuance of a certificate. We do also have a division focusing on capacity building, of course, in those sustainability questions. And finally, we also work with a mission-driven project having impact direct on the ground. Yes, and then you see on the map the countries we are focusing on. We have this, let's say, advantage to be really, to have our feet on the ground in producing countries, as well as in the buyer countries. So far, we have more than 2 million hectares of certified farms. In fact, we are also celebrating our 30 years anniversary, so we can do a common party. And we currently have 360 staff spread all around those countries. And yeah, we're working with more than 4,000 organizations now. Talking about our certification divisions that I was mentioning earlier. So we have a couple of certification schemes that we are able to, that we are accredited to. In forestry, of course, FSC, PFC that you know, Sustainable Forest Initiative, but also in agriculture with the Rainforest Alliance, etc. In climate as well, recently with the gold standards and other carbon standard. I'm not going to go into detail in this. I just want to highlight that we also do have our own sustainability schemes at Preferred by Nature that we have developed ourselves. Our sustainability advisory services aim to, again, to accompany companies in their sustainability commitment from the early stage at defining their policy to the implementation of it, acting, what does it need to be in place to implement that, and to the communication of their sustainability efforts. So we are linking those three, we're trying to link those three parts. And mission-driven projects. So we have the possibility also through our partners and funders to work on projects and have direct impact on the ground. One of those projects have actually helped us to develop our own sourcing hub, for those who have not heard about, which is a risk assessment tool that we're going to talk about in the next slides. And this is our training hub. If you're interested, we're developing training materials from FSC to agriculture, also in the famous AUDR in several languages and different locations. So that was just for the high-level presentation of Preferred by Nature, and I will hand it over to our moderator.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to try another Menti. Let's see if this works. And for those in the room, if you can't get the tool to work, I'd also invite you to just raise your hand and share verbally. So the question that we'd like to ask the audience, both online and in the room, is what really comes to mind when you hear the word risk? And this is sustainability risk. We've discussed over the course of this week a lot of other kinds of risk, like financial crime. Linked risk, but for this one, it's sustainability risk. And we're starting to see some responses coming in, and do just let me know, for those in the room, if you can't get it to work, and you can just shout out what comes to mind. Brilliant, so we're starting to see some responses come through. Assurance, clean chain of custody, fraud, future-proof, yeah, compliance. Yeah, compliance is remaining strong. Extreme weather events, lack of accountability, human rights, danger, fines, costs, climate crisis, fraud. Brilliant, it's like starting to peter right now. So yeah, so all of these things relate to risk, right? And I think on the seeing compliance there really highlighted, really demonstrates that we are coming into a time now where risk management is becoming increasingly a license to operate for businesses. It's no longer a nice to have, it's very much moving into a need to have. And it's tough, as I'm sure many who are working in this space know. It's tough to really effectively and incredibly manage risk. And it's part of that because it's supply chains are complex, and we are looking at really complex webs that are interconnected that we need to manage risk in. So brilliant. Thank you everyone for participating in that Menti. And I'll now hand over to Matteo and Jennifer to take us through the regulatory landscape.
Thanks, Josh. Good to see you again. And to be honest, actually, when we had this Menti question, we were hoping to see one word that actually didn't appear among the answers. But let me try then a different approach. You can already go to the next slide, Jennifer. Thanks. So let me try with this approach. Tuesday, during the plenary, after your speech, Chip, we were discussing the top three trends that we should remember. Do you remember what were these three trends? And in particular, the very first one that we were discussing. And I mean, it has been an highlight, I will say, of this week, throughout all this week, because that's very connected to what we would like to speak about today. Traceability was one trend. It was the use of technology to enable traceability and geolocation. Yes. Before that one. All right. Yeah, a long time ago. It was sustainability legislation. Sustainability legislation. And in order to explain this point and to connect why it's even more important nowadays to think about risk assessment, and that's why we would like to present today the Risk Information Alliance, I would like to give the example of the story of FSC to then connect with this idea of this trend of sustainability legislation. FSC was born, I said before, in 1994. In 1993, there was the Rio Summit, and governments, they gathered together because they wanted to find a solution. They want to find an agreement on forestry matter. Do you know what was the outcome of that summit? Go, Chip. Yeah.
This is how old I am. I was actually there at that summit when this was happening. Yeah, failure to agree on a forest treaty, which had been proposed and then opposed by the United States, among others. And that was one thing. And then people looking for alternatives, which I think is what you're about to say.
Thanks. Precisely. Yeah, exactly. It was a failure. They didn't manage to find an agreement on world forestry. And what happened then? That a group of leading environmentalists, indigenous communities, progressive companies, they gathered together and they thought, okay, instead of using the approach of regulation, why don't we use the market in order to nudge companies towards responsible forestry practices? And that's precisely how they created FSC. That was the reason. So FSC is actually the result of governmental inaction on forestry policies. And we were in the 90s and also in the year 2000, of course, there was legislation regulating environmental matters and forestry, but it was more what we call soft law. So it was really more of a light touch. And things really actually changed 3-4 years ago with this EU Green Deal that I'm sure you're also familiar with. What is the EU Green Deal? What is the main novelty of the European Green Deal? The European Green Deal is a policy framework that includes many hundreds of environmental legislation. And the main novelty there, the two main novelties, is that these legislation are legally binding, first novelty. And the second one is they're all interconnected and they all serve the same purpose. And the purpose will be to allow the European Union to become climate neutral. Now, within the European Green Deal, you have the UTR, the UDR, CSDD, CSDD, and what do they have in common? Those are all due diligence legislation. The idea is to put the responsibility back on business. So they need to minimize as much as possible the risk and all the wrongdoing than they're doing on the supply chain. That's the idea. What happens usually in the EU then gets also replicated around the world. And that's why we have in the US also Lacey Act, in Australia, Legal Long Prohibition Act. Those are just examples. We're going to further expand this point. Jennifer is going to further expand this. But this to say that also in the other session, we spoke many times about the UDR, but it's not really the UDR, the thing. UDR is just one piece of a puzzle, just one part of a bigger trend. And the trend, it reflects a broader trend in sustainability legislation that are asking more accountability, more transparency, more responsibility, and I was not even sure whether to put this word or not, but apparently it exists in English, more demonstrability, because you don't only have to minimize your risk, but you need to demonstrate and back it up with data. That's, for example, the example of the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability reporting due diligence. And that's, again, UDR is just one piece of the puzzle that it was happening all around the world. And that's why it's important to speak about sustainability legislation and the need for risk assessment. We will go there. But before that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jennifer, who's going to further expand on this point and the sustainability legislation. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Matteo. So again, I think just to reiterate, why should we pay closer attention to this new regulatory landscape, and why is it so much different than any other regulation that we've seen, especially with all of these other regulations? And the point is that it will require a significant shift in the way that companies do compliance. And it basically, the way that companies have been operating and doing compliance right now, it will not be enough. So we're talking about a new regulatory landscape, and this is just a list. I pulled this list together months ago. I'm sure there's other regulations that are coming up in other different countries, but this is basically a list of a bunch of different regulations in UK, US, EU, China, Japan, even California. Obviously, the EU deforestation-free regulation. But what do all of these things have in common? All these regulations have in common. And it's that they're all requiring, in some way, shape, or form, better data from greener and more responsible supply chains. So to hone in on, why these regulations are so different, traditionally we've seen that ESG compliance meant simply more reporting and collecting more data, but it was mostly business as usual. Companies have been just using the same systems to just collect simply more data and report out on them. But the EU deforestation regulation, along with all of these other regulations, are requiring an operational shift in how forestry and agricultural companies, and I italicize agricultural because previously companies under, for example, the EU TR were kind of used to stricter regulation for sustainability and for legality. But now what EUDR and what these other regulations really bring in is a lot of companies and supply chains that formally haven't had to undergo this kind of due diligence before. So it's including, the required use of technology, transparent supply chains. You heard a lot about that earlier in the week on, geospatial data and collecting that kind of data, but then also conducting risk assessments and mitigation. And of course, as you know, this session is really focusing on the importance of risk assessments. So why risk assessments? So within the process of due diligence, the decisions as a result of due diligence, including risk mitigation, really hinges on one major thing, and that's the result of the risk assessment. So really to hone in on this and really emphasize that the quality of risk assessments is critical to sustainable supply chain decision making. So basically every decision that you make later on really hinges on the ability to collect quality information during the kind of risk assessment and scoping phase. And then just some of the main challenges that stakeholders are facing when it comes to this risk assessment piece is that we see companies have a very much of a fragmented approach. This happens in companies and organizations where they have sustainability responsibilities divided among a bunch of different teams, whether it's HR, procurement, compliance. Often they'll have separate responsible sourcing teams. And this creates silos and a weak governance structure. So risk assessment is happening in different ways, teams and sources of information. So everyone's doing it differently and it's not really consistent. And then limited regulatory capacity. So these regulations, as I've mentioned, are hitting companies that may have not faced the same level of regulatory scrutiny or have had experienced weak enforcement thus far. And so that results in teams not using clear, consistent methodologies when it comes to assessing these risks. And then, as we know, supply chain data and traceability shortfalls. So this results in disparate, weak data or outdated data that is leading to weaker risk assessments. And I'm sure, as you've all experienced, there are also many different sources of risk information, and it's really hard to differentiate what's a quality kind of risk assessment methodology versus what's not, and what can you really rely on, and what's up to date. So all to say that the key message here is that the quality of risk assessments is critical for supply chain decision making, but there remains a global gap in up-to-date, cohesive, detailed risk assessment and risk information that's built on a strong methodology that companies, organizations, everyone can rely on in terms of kind of more of a singular source of truth. So This is also another Menti question. I do want to lead this, Josh. Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so round 3. So Menti question, for if you can join us again on Menti, is which resources would you use for risk assessment information? And given that we've got a range of different stakeholder groups in the room, I'd be very interested to see if we're all aligning on the same information points or quite different ones. So again, you can join through the QR code or through menti.com and using the code that's on the screen. And I'll just give you all a little bit of time to answer. Brilliant. So we've got information coming in. So data from government, TCFD, governmental databases. Yeah, I'm seeing a trend here already. Public reports. Josh. I have been told I'm a font of information, so I'll take it. Headquarters, open source data. That's interesting. Certification schemes. Forest composition. Ooh, they're coming in thick and fast now. Risk assessment portals, brilliant. FSC controlled wood risk assessment. Interesting. We'll be talking about that in just a bit. Suppliers data, available data, government databases, land tenure, right? So we've got a range, geospatial data. We've got a range of different information sources listed on screen. Some of them aggregated, some of them open source, some of them with strong governance over them, some of them maybe more disparate. Customs data, brilliant. And you can really see here then there's such a range of information sources that actors are using to inform their risk assessments. Just really speaks to your point. How do you pick what's actually good quality that you can trust, that you can rely on, that's credible?
Yeah, and that there's no one kind of source that's really emerging as something that people are submitting to. So that's
yeah. I'm sorry that I'm not emerging as the key theme. Give me a few years.
Josh and Bold, yeah. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next one, but appreciate everyone's responses here. It's really helpful for us to see where people are going to. Okay, I'm gonna hand this next off to Terry. I think you're up on deck, and or Matteo, I'm not sure.
No, it's me.
Okay,
It's me.
so it's all you.
Yeah, it's all me. Thank you. Yeah, Terry Campbell, senior expert for chain of custody at FSC International. Yeah, like Matteo's history, in the 90s, I decided that I wasn't going to go. My career path was not in the regulatory space, but it was in the market, and so it's really interesting to now be working for 20 some odd years, creating a market for FSC products and other sustainable products, only to come full circle back to here. And I think that's interesting because voluntary certification systems definitely have a place and as a solution, but what we're seeing is to overcome the challenges we face, we really need to scale up the solutions outside of those voluntary systems, and that's what you're seeing with a lot of these regulations. And so these tools that we've been creating over the years, I think will certainly help people get aligned and move forward. So FSC has a really long history. Back into the early 2000s with risk assessments, we created a standard called the control wood standard that manufacturers could use when they were mixing FSC material and non-certified material together. We wanted to make sure that they weren't mixing the worst input materials from the worst forestry in the world and then labeling it with our label. So they created the control wood standard, which required these risk assessments. And the reason it was is we heard from industry back then that it was really difficult to create FSC products and keeping things segregated all the way through. I used to do audits of those mills, and I mean they have huge log yards, and it's just very difficult to keep like bespoke wood going through when you're trying to build buildings. So again, we created this bottom floor, and I'm gonna since it's Thursday afternoon, I'm gonna go off script. I haven't really told the rest of the panelists this, so buckle up your seatbelt. I'm going to introduce some more acronyms. The first one's going to be, and this is going to help us understand why and the place for risk assessments. if it's a new term for you. But the first letter is I. Oh, I didn't know where the screen was. This was what happens when we go off script. Where are we going? Okay. Perfect, right there. Oh, hey, how you doing up there? Okay. All right, 90 minutes.
And I think for those online, maybe read out what you're writing as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's going to be simple. So this I, L, and then T. And this is on a continuum here, yeah? So I stands for illegal, L for legal, T for top line. So we're talking about forced activities. And we can simply just draw a line and break this into 3 sections. And so we know, and we've been learning a lot this week about these activities. They're nefarious, they're criminal, they use money laundering, they operate in very shady ways. And there's a certain set of enforcements that hopefully can minimize that. Risk assessments really operate in this middle area, because what you find with legal activities around the world is it may not meet your corporate or your government or your personal values, but it's legal. It's legal in that country. But you may want to decide to remove the risk of that. So EUDR fits right in here, yeah? I mean, it's a law, but it's not necessarily going to accept deforested wood from a country that allows it. And so the top line, the T, that's sort of top of the end forestry, you know, maybe FSC, maybe not FSC, some other certification system. And these lines are there's flow between them. We know this. And so the risk assessments really are looking at minimizing risk that may be legal in a country, but again, apologies there. I know there's an E there, but may not be accepted in your supply chain or in your government. And so this is the space for them. They're never going to be respected by these operators in the I area, and you already know that material coming from these top lines meets most of the requirements of a risk assessment, and then they would be legal as well. So let me just add 2 more really short ones. So this is, whoa, that's the worst D ever. So D, J, and then R, I. So this is divestment or jail. Those are your options for going this way. So right, if it's still legal, but it doesn't meet your corporate or your government laws, then you can divest from that. You just don't buy material. And you can learn that from a risk assessment. If you apply a risk assessment to a country or a sub-region, then you can learn what's going on there and you can decide to divest. If it's so bad that it gets over into this illegal activity, that's where the J comes in. That's when you go to jail. That's when you talk to the Nature Crime Alliance. On this side, we have a reward and inspire, right? Because again, much more improved laws potentially, more stringent laws being enforced. That's the reward. They should be rewarded, not divested from. They may not be top line, but they're still doing forest management and they're still practicing forest management that's widely accepted as environmentally sound, socially just. But then you get to the top line and that's your inspiration. So that's again, that's the top of the practice. And so that's kind of where risk assessments fit in now. And I hope that's kind of where thank you. That's kind of where we've gone with them. We really, again, have been using them and our stakeholders have been using them for a long time, but we really, now there's some new values for them. So whether it's in the context of EUDR or corporate social responsibility, we're seeing, again, as you've heard, people really want to evaluate their sourcing areas. So for us moving forward, it's really going to help our certificate holders and others. Our risk assessment framework is going to help them align with the EUDR. So we've taken our original risk assessment framework and we've knitted in or integrated EUDR requirements. So now you can just do one risk assessment per region, per sub-region, and you would be aligned with both. You'll notice I'm staying away from the word compliant, right? Does everyone know why? Because the only people that can tell you you're complying with EUDR is a competent authority in the EUDR. So we use the word alignment. And then the other tool is for our forest managers and chain of custody certificate holders. We have 55,000 certificate holders around the world. 30% of them have exposure to EUDR. So somewhere between 16 to 18,000 manufacturers, distributors will all be needing to have some knowledge and or ability to do a risk assessment, whether they're doing it themselves or requiring their supplier to do it. They're going to have to know how to do that. And then lastly, we're looking really to to integrate these risk assessments that we're creating with the new methodology from our RIA into some technological solutions that we're bringing on board over the coming months and years, just because, as Matteo said, it's very much something that needs to speed things up and make it much more credible. So now I'm going to pass it back to Matteo. We're going to keep the rotating show going, and thank you very much.
Thanks. So yeah, a lot of the script today. Yeah, so just to recap what Terry was saying. Essentially, we were starting with the risk assessment before the UDR. Now, the idea is really not to speak again about the UDR. Again, last session of the day, you all know this. I just want to highlight two features of the UDR and why these features are calling for a new generation of risk assessment, for another way, for an enhanced way of doing risk assessment. This is a landmark regulation, the UDR, that tackles deforestation and degradation. Just one point to highlight here is that it's an European law, but its impact is supposed to be global because it aims at minimize EU deforestation, but deforestation also and degradation happen outside of the EU. The two features that I would like to highlight here is that the UDR actually was born and was used the UTR as a template. UTR, you can imagine as Lacey Act. And what is the most important feature? UTR was focusing only on wood. Wood was the only commodity within the UDR and was focusing on legality only. So UDR is expanding the scope and is including cocoa, coffee, soy, palm oil, cattle and beef, rubber, all commodities that are commonly associated with deforestation. So what I would like to highlight here, that there were already risk assessment for wood, but essentially the UDR, by expanding the list of commodities, is also calling for a new generation of risk assessment for other commodities. So keep this point in mind, because this is one of the points that let us think about having an alliance for different kind of risk assessment, working for different commodities in different value chain. So that's the first feature I would like to highlight here. The second feature is, once again, we spoke about this mega trend of due diligence legislation, but at the end of the day, due diligence is always 3 steps in all legislation. So it's information gathering. So you need to gather the information about your supply chain. You need then to assess the risk. And then if the assessment tells you that there could be a risk, you need to mitigate the risk as much as possible. That's the structure, and that's common for all due diligence legislation. And where, for instance, certification schemes can help is in this part. They can help you assess and then further mitigate the risk. But once again, we're not here to talk about the UDR. What we're here to say that this is a trend among also other legislation. So if you broaden out the scope, if you include different commodities that work different in different value chains, you add this structure of due diligence, then you understand why we were thinking about a new sort of generation of risk assessment. So I'm not going to present here, I'm not here really to present what FSC is doing on the UDR, just to say that yes, we were born in 1993. We're always evolving, organizations are evolving, but this is also a way to enhance the risk assessment that Terry was speaking. So all these legislation are calling really for a new generation of risk assessment and to include some of the risks that need to be mitigated under UDR. Which kind of risk? Which are the indicators? Many, many. At the moment, there are many indicators that we are considering. They range from 60 to 70. We don't know yet. You can see here just a couple of highlights. So human labor rights, definitely indigenous people rights, conversion and forest degradation, water source, but really we're speaking about 70, 60. And this is just an example of FSC. But this is an example that, of course, the Alliance is looking into in order to think about other indicators that can work also for other commodities across different value chains. And with that, I swear this is my last time on stage, and I'm happy now. I hope you have now the context to understand why actually we were thinking about developing the Alliance. And I'm very happy that we have Sandra here, who's going to present now why we come up with the Risk Information Alliance and what actually is the Risk Information Alliance. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you, Matteo. The reason why we're changing presenter is also for you to stay awake, and I hope it works then. Because yes, we are actually going to talk about why we have this session about the Risk Information Alliance, right? So what is it? As the name says, it's an initiative, a collaborative initiative between organizations that are either member of the ICIL that was presented by Josh earlier, or that are aligned with the ICIL principles. And those organizations have in common the need to develop sustainability risk data or the interest of using sustainability risk data, right? And the aim of this Risk Information Alliance, once organizations come together with a common goal, what's the aim? As we showed earlier in the previous slides, there is a need to solve the fundamental sustainability challenges, which are the lack currently of process, methodology, aligned data around risk data that are relevant to the forestry and agriculture sector. So who are those partners? So on the screen here, you see the founding partners with SVP Sustainable Biomass Program leading it. In addition to RSB, Roundtable of Sustainable Biomass, the Preferred by Nature, and FSC. Those organizations are, of course, supported by ICIL. And currently, as we're speaking, we are also in ongoing discussions with other organizations that might want to join and that also have an interest in this risk data. I just want to highlight here that those funding partners are organizations that are either scheme owner or developing schemes and have been directly working with the risk assessment. So what are the common factors that bring those alliances together? So we try to put it in a different layers. We see, first of all, a very urgent, immediate need of having those risk data or risk methodology developed. Why? Is because of this thing that you may have heard about called AUDR, right? That is around the corner, and that requests to have robust data to be used, let's say, tomorrow. That's the first thing, the immediate needs of this data. But then on the pipeline, as it was mentioned also earlier, you have other regulation under development or already approved that put additional constraints and pressure on organizations and companies such as the need of having a more transparent and a traceable supply chain, the need to have a mandatory reporting system, and so on, and the need also to have a due diligence system in place. So all this also makes that we need to broaden the scope of the risk data. And finally, it's important to say also that we are not scratching from zero. There are systems that exist, right? You have, I mean, FSC just showed their control room system. Preferred by Nature, we have also our sourcing hub. So those data exist. They need to be aligned. They need to be extended, and they need to be also updated. Yeah. So for those who have worked with risk assessment, there are a couple of challenges, right, when we engage with them. The first one is how it requires human resource, but also financial resources, which is also linked to the point number 2, how lengthy process it is. It's time consuming. Why? Because risk assessment demand that it's developed also by experts that have a local knowledge of the national legal framework, for example, that can read and translate those legal framework as well. Those data or the methodology needs to be also gone through consultation process to be able to be endorsed. So it takes time. And at Preferred by Nature, the risk assessment that we've done so far have taken, let's say, from a range from 3 months to 9 months, really depending on how complex and in which commodity we are. The third point is also very important. Risk assessment is not static, right? It demands ongoing revisions. Why? Because law might evolve, because system might evolve, because risk also might evolve, right? So we also see with the system we have in place, every 3 to 5 years, there is really a need to refresh everything and we go through the system. Those risk assessments that are, I'm going to say, poorly done or not done in a significant or consistent way, might also induce the users into some mistakes, right? When you have how to say that, real positive outcome, no, sorry, false positive, right? So for example, if the risk assessment has shown that the company has a insignificant risk, then it might expose the company to further risk, right, or further fines or such problems. On the other way, if a risk has not been identified, or if a risk has been identified, sorry, but it was poorly done, the company might put lots of resources to try to find mitigation measures while the risk was not there. So important to have a consistent system. And then, as we said, it's a challenge to also secure funding to develop and maintain the system. Again, at Preferred by Nature, we saw that it was not that hard necessarily to get funders, but it was hard to get funds to maintain and update our system and our data. So how the member of the Alliance pretends solving this problem? First of all, is to develop a common methodology, something that we agree, we align to do, with also common indicators, and how by also sharing our current activities that we are all doing today. Like I showed earlier, we are all involved in risk assessment somehow, sharing our expertise, sharing our sources, right, to come up with a solid and robust system. And then also by using our organization together as an expertise to leverage the resource when we can. So just in summary, in terms of steps and in terms of activities, what are we going to do? So like I said, align on the development of a common risk assessment methodology, very important. Then agree also on a set of indicators that are easy verifiable, that comes also with guidelines on how to use them, with clear thresholds. Then we want to prioritize the commodities which are more subjected to those risks, or the countries. and then develop this risk assessments. The results or the outcome of this risk assessment will be shared amongst all the partners of the risk alliance. And all of us partners will be also able to reuse that in our respective platform or system. And then seek for funding. So everything will be done under the very tight control of ISIL, just to add also more credibility to this process. And yes, we're going to talk more now, Terry, about this methodology. So over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, so as you've heard, the RIA is creating, sorry, jumped ahead a second. Creating this methodology, and it really is based on these three pillars here. You know, the drive for this right now is regulation. But even if you're just using it for a market purpose, having a robust methodology is really going to help you fend off scrutiny. And if you are in the regulatory space, meaning you're looking at putting products into the EU or something of that nature, then the scrutiny of regulatory agents is much, I would say, much scarier than those of some voluntary systems, right? So you really need to rely on a very robust system. So that's a key pillar here. Credibility also kind of plays into that, as far as making sure that this methodology is created across multiple organizations, just so that we can understand where the risks are and how to structure the framework. And then efficiency. This just gets at some of what Sandra was saying is the challenges, both time and human and financial resources. So this just shows a quick reference point, basically. I mean, it's pretty obvious that between methodology and indicators, these are the indicators that Matteo is introducing. So, you know, covering GMO and water and social issues, human rights, that sort of thing. When you have alignment, you can really maximize the value of alignment amongst different organizations. And it's just a quick reference to sort of say how things could either have limited value or very no value. So this just kind of, for us, proves that bringing multiple organizations together. And I feel like one of the other themes of this week has been collaboration. Again, the challenges are insurmountable sometimes, right? But if more organizations were willing to sort of drop their guard and look to collaborate, I think we would make a lot more progress. Covering more of the benefits, you know, as I mentioned, pooling resources. These risk assessments are while they may be conducted locally, they're not like a forest management certification where you're actually going to go on the ground. So they really need to be credible from the very beginning, because they're usually not ground truth to the scrutiny that a forest management certification is going to be done. So it doesn't mean you do it from halfway around the world on Google and you're just looking up a couple of resources and you check the box. You're likely going to interview local experts. You may have local experts there. But the fact of the matter is that it's an assessment. It's not a forest management certification where you're walking the forest to see what's going on. So bringing the most stringent and credible risk assessment to its conclusion is it's going to just make it more of a long-lasting product. And I really, this slide here sort of shows that, and what I like to talk about when I'm talking to certificate holders in the FSC system is what are their plans once we can stop talking the four-letter word for 2024 EUDR. What are their plans after that? And the plans are this. Let's get back to talking about the values for us and for our stakeholders that a certification like FSC brings that's above the regulatory requirement threshold. And so that's what this sort of indicates here, is that, you know, we really need to get these risk assessments pulled together for this initial need. But we're also, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that they're not going to have to do twice the work, where the final product is going to be able to serve for both regulatory compliance and sustainability indicators. So it's a call to action. I mean, we feel like our differences between the organizations is one of our strengths at the Risk Information Alliance, because we're learning from each other. So we're looking for other organizations, government agencies, private businesses, certificate holders to come join the Information Alliance and help us, kind of make sure that we create the most robust, credible risk assessments framework in an efficient manner. So, yeah, that's kind of our charge for this. This is to kind of see if we can get some other folks involved and to let you know that there's room. We've kind of had some meetings and some workshops already, but nothing is fully baked as of now. So we're still looking for more people and organizations to step up, be the first one to breathe life into this new initiative, which is going to be critical. So here's some actual actions to helping us build the alliance. So, if you're operating in a commodity or in a country and that there's limited or weak data, or you're having a hard time, then this Information Alliance wants to hear about that. And again, we have forestry expertise and FSC, we have biomass expertise, we have agriculture and forestry preferred by nature. We really need people to help us set priorities. Do we want to just go do all the low-hanging fruit, meaning countries where we don't think there's a lot of risk? Do we want to focus on countries where there's a lot of risk? We also need a lot of support, like technical support, because we have quite a bit of experience and knowledge, but I think the more the merrier in this initiative. And the more diverse a group we can pull together, the more quality the product is going to be at the end. And then at the end, the acceleration of this is vital. Whether you're, just even thinking about the pace of the negative activities in our forests, or in our agricultural or in other commodity spaces, we need to do this really soon. We can't kind of wait, obviously. So that's your charge. Here's your website. Everybody's emailing me right now. I don't see anyone's fingers, but no, I'm just kidding. So thank you for your time today. I will be around for questions, and I'll give it back to Josh. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Terry. So I can ask our speakers to come up here, because now we're coming to a question and answer session. So we'd be really interested to hear feedback from the audience and any questions you might have about the Risk Information Alliance or about anything that was presented during the session. And that's both to those who are in the room with us here in Washington or also online. And David, I believe that you're going to be managing the online questions and letting us know when those come through. In the meantime, I do have a first question for our panel, and that is if you can tell us a bit more about first timelines for the Risk Information Alliance, and then second, just about kind of the consultation process and why stakeholder engagement is important when you're looking to develop risk kind of methodologies as well. So, good, Mike.
Yeah. So did you say timeline first? Oh, good. Okay. Well, I don't know. Today. No. I mean, let's say that, this summer, I don't know what summer means to everybody, but in the next many months, we're already at FSC taking what we've learned from the Risk Information Alliance first few meetings and applying that to our own, right? Because the idea is that the Alliance creates this framework that, as Sandra was saying, each organization that is a party to can take and apply it for their stakeholders, right? And so we're already on our end working on what, since we know 95% of it's of the indicators for this bigger framework are there and they're compliant or acceptable to like what we would want. So we're already starting to work through the process you saw in one of Mateo's slides some numbers and standards at the bottom, and that's basically some reference to things we're working on. And what we're going to be able to do for that is starting July 1st, we're going to publish our risk assessment sort of framework for FSC. So if you're an FSC certificate holder or not, you could still, it's public standard, you could go online and download that. And if you apply that to your suppliers, or you have your suppliers apply it to their, then they're going to be FSC compliant and EUDR aligned, because as I said, we'll put those two together. So, and then to your second question, what's the value of having stakeholders involved? Well, again, it's we have FSC currently has 60 national risk assessments, so 60 different countries where we have risk assessments. Every one of those had multiple stakeholders in the country and external providing comments. So it's vital. I mean, we are based in Germany and Belgium, and we have people all over, but we need other people on the ground all the time, because these things, again, it's not like walking through a forest on a forest management audit. We really need to have those experts in the region, in the country, in the sub-region, helping us assess the risk around all these indicators. So.
Brilliant, thank you. Terry, over to you, Sandy.
Just to add on the importance of the consultations, we are working in countries, as Terry said, where some of the resources and commodities we are working with belongs also to the government and are managed under a specific legal framework. It is very important to get everybody's point of view, all stakeholders' inputs in validating some of the indicators and the process, to add also more credibility and robustness on the whole system. This is quite key for the success of the alliance as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Sandy. And yeah, just seeing if anyone in the room has any questions for the panel. If what they've presented, what they've talked about makes sense, if it's exciting, if it seems to fill a gap that you think needs to be filled.
Thank you, John Simeone. I apologize if this takes a couple steps back in terms of the question, but when we often think of risk, we think of like personal risk, right? Some individuals are risk averse, some are not, some companies are risk averse. I guess I'm wondering, in the context of these risk assessments, if basically what you're trying to do is ultimately trying to basically enable FSC or any of the consortium members of the alliance members to basically sort of raise the bar of the minimum level of risk acceptable through each of the organizations. And I'm wondering if individually or collectively you've also thought about, like, what are some of the downsides of trying to do that, because each company or each organization sometimes can assess their own risk, just the way everyone has different risks. So I'd love to hear, like, it's a valiant effort, and I definitely am excited about it. I'm sure everyone here is, but I'm curious to hear what are some of the risks of things that could be lost through this collaborative effort. I'd love to hear that, if you're willing to address it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, if I can just kind of rephrase your question, just to make sure I'm following right, you're asking that maybe through the collaboration there might be unintended consequences that would be negative. Okay, that's a very challenging question. I mean, because my mind always goes to more collaboration is good. So you're already like fighting against one of my major tenets of life. But I guess, and I might just go back and say that from the RIA's perspective, I think we will continue to drive. This is a continual improvement process, as Sandra indicated earlier. And so I think if we're finding blind spots, then it's upon the alliance to then go out and seek input and more expertise in a specific area. And all of the organizations involved have both a very strong, multiple feet in the environmental community and in the business community and the social justice community as well. And I think by having that kind of three-tiered, it'll keep us on the right course and assessing and/or including the correct indicators. So I'm hopeful at the early phase here that, like, the more collaboration we can get, the better, and the blind spots will be even.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I say that
Well, actually, David's also.
David.
raised his hand.
Oh, go for it, David. Yeah, we're here.
And if you can introduce David as well before you make your comment.
Hi, sorry for interrupting. I can't see anyone here, so I just thought I'd just to answer that question. I mean, there's always opportunity for companies on an individual level to evaluate risks. I think that one of the really key concerns here is, as Sandra sort of raised, is the resources required to develop credible risk assessments. And that sort of level of resources is often outwith the reach or the ability of individual companies to do. It takes time, it takes a lot of sort of technical capacity, and just for companies which are sourcing from many different countries and across different commodities, it's just an enormous effort for them. So this need to collaborate is fundamental, as Josh and others have mentioned. And really the major risk, I mean, I can't think of sort of negative risks. I'm sure there may be some of those out there, but the big risk is that without collaboration, there simply won't be this type of risk data available through the member organizations and how each of them use that risk data, and therefore available to companies. Again, the other benefits of collaborating are just the reach. If each organization which becomes a member of the Risk Information Alliance has its own network, has its own set of stakeholders, by bringing those together, we're sort of raising the bar in terms of the credibility of risk assessments. Any desk-based risk assessment requires further steps to ensure its credibility. Data can be out of date. It may be erroneous. There are other sort of challenges there. By conducting a sort of a proper stakeholder and expert consultation process, you're kind of hedging against that sort of erroneous information creeping into your risk decisions. So you're putting out a draft. You're basically saying to the world, is there anything here which is missing? Is there anything here which is not quite right? Please give us feedback so that we can improve the quality of the risk assessment and conclusions. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'd also just quickly add that I think the kind of the public consultation process, of course, but also to recognize that there is a level of objectivity when determining risk, of course. And I think having the consultation process, having all of these strong organizations involved, hopefully others that come involved, you enhance and kind of start to minimize that objectivity when it comes to risk decision making and how we quantify that risk. Because the more eyes on it, the more consultation that we get, the stronger that methodology becomes, and it becomes less objective because everyone's involved in that. So.
And just to quickly add, it's a very relevant question, and that's why we are calling for more members, right? To enforce also our humble force and to bring more perspective into this work.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a next question.
Yeah, thank you. I just want us to go maybe 2 steps back. And because it's a wonderful presentation and I love every part of the presentation. But I still believe there's some fundamentals we may have to look again for the risk assessment. I always use these equations. There is a demand coming and people have to supply to meet that demand. But the risk assessment is largely based on where it is coming from. But who is bringing the demand? Are there no risk assessment at the demand side that we should be looking? Because we are doing FSC, we are doing FLECT VPA, PEFC, now EUDR. What else are we not doing? Deforestation is on the increase. Climate change is getting worse. So there is some fundamental thing that maybe we are all not looking at. If we don't control demand, consumption patterns don't change. I bet you there is no kind of risk assessment that we'll put in place that will ever get there. Because demand has to be controlled if we are all thinking about the planet. And the demand side are the side that are teaching us all these nice and wonderful things that we have to follow. But the fundamentals is also not right. So where do we stand? Illegal mining, gold, where is it going? Timber, where does it end? Cattle ranching, meat, where does it end? Are we actually being sincere with ourselves if we really want to tackle this issue about the environment? And there's some fundamental thing that goes to the core of our heart moral that we have to look at. Else we'll come up with all the initiatives. I bet you from EUDR, something else is going to come. So are we keeping on bringing up initiative when we are not looking at the fundamentals issue to address? So I think we should take some 2 steps back and look at what kind of risk assessment can we do at the demand side to control their demand also for what product, whichever product that they want to take, and how it is affecting the very environment that we all want to protect. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really pertinent question. Matteo, I think you,
I-
or Sandy first, or?
I can try to answer Mr. Jima's question. I believe that the reason of this initiative is to tackle what you're just saying, to control to control the demand of sustainable product, of legal product, right? When we develop risk assessment, we ask ourselves, it is for who? Who are we doing that for? And what for? And actually this is used by the buyers, by the demand, right? To have a proper due diligence system within their supply chain and ensuring that what they are inputting and importing are from the sustainable sources. That's really the objective of why we're sitting here and trying to get this alliance together. So you can control this demand from the buyers, from also your concession, with the timber feeding your concession, your sawmill, at every stage, right? A risk assessment is used. What you want to add?
Just a quick remark. Thanks, Richard. You said I'm gonna take 2 steps back because you first before said I'm gonna take 1 step back. You said I'm gonna take 2 steps back. I think you take at least 10 steps back, but I think this is the fundamental question for all of us working in this field of sustainability. And it's really connected your question to essentially, if you want me to rephrase it using what you were saying, doing before, Terry, are there any limits to grow essentially for this demand? And this is like perhaps even a bigger question for us is, I mean, this is, I would say it's more for the public to reply to this question. But at the same time, I would really say as a person working for FSC, believing in FSC, is that the public mandatory initiative, voluntary initiative, public and private are not mutually exclusive. They're mutually supportive. And that's exactly what we're doing. So there are now more and more global sustainability legislation. Not sure if we're actually addressing completely the demand side, but I mean, the two are complementary. And that's, yet another reason of why we're having this alliance, to be concrete, to do something on the problem that we have at hand and trying to offer a concrete solution and learning also along the way. Because I mean, this is inceptional, and actually it's also a question for everybody in the room. Like if you have any ideas, if you have feedback, if there is something that you think we're missing, that's also a great moment to flag us, because that's exactly what we're looking for here.
Brilliant. Thank you, panel. So we've got a next question from someone on.
Hi, all right, just wanted to read off a question that we got online. question is, will a standardized risk-based approach help alleviate the stringent geolocation requirements of EUDR?
So it's a good question. Unfortunately, no. The geolocation requirements are a separate article under EUDR, Article 9, which defines all of the information requirements as part of a due diligence statement, versus what the Risk Information Alliance is trying to do is address a different article in EUDR, which is the article relating to risk assessment criteria, so that a company must conduct a due diligence for products and their supply chains based off of where those products are coming from. So it's trying to address that side of things, where companies currently have the struggle of not knowing where to go for risk assessment information and where to collect it and what's updated. And so that's what, so the EUDR is just trying, the Risk Information Alliance is trying to tackle that side of EUDR, is the risk assessment, not the geolocation information.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a next. Go for it.
I'll be quick. I'm Christy Reuter. I'm with Customs and Border Protection, Trade Regulatory Audit. So being in the enforcement side of things, I'm just curious, is there a mechanism for you guys to, report bad actors that you might be seeing in your risk analysis, or is these products really just for consumers or, members of your alliance?
From an FSC perspective, I mean, the 60 I mentioned, they're publicly available. The ones that are already on the books now, and then as we go forward and we take this new framework and we glean out the indicators that are vital to our system, then and as we apply them to countries, or they're applied to countries by people in that region, then they'll be publicly available as well. Yep. Yeah.
And I think the way that enforcement agencies could use this tool is, it wouldn't necessarily be targeting like bad actors, but if you have an actor, a suspicious actor that is sourcing from a particular location or based in a location, you could use these risk assessments to get a good sense of the level of illegality risk for human rights or for sustainability or for deforestation or whatever it is. And again, the idea is that we have these risk assessments are very detailed. They have expert insights on the ground. And so it's kind of a first filter that enforcement agencies could use to, if there is something suspicious that's happening.
And David, I see you've got your hand up, so we'll take your intervention quickly. We'll go to, and then we'll go to a last question from the room before wrapping up. Over to you, David.
Yeah, just to answer or to add to that. So, I mean, the general process of developing risk assessments is that you're starting with publicly available information which is in the public domain, which may speak to the presence or absence of risks within a country in relation to a particular commodity. It's often the case, or certainly information that's in the public domain around bad actors or bad practices will factor into that general process of understanding risks, within that context. We have seen also scenarios where there's a lot of information in the public domain about specific activities or specific bad practices or bad actors, which can sometimes overemphasize or give a false impression of the level of risks of legal non-compliance, for example, within a country, when in actual fact, it may be that broadly there is quite wide compliance, for example, in relation to a particular law or set of laws. So that information is important. It's important to factor into any kind of risk assessment work that we do. But in going back to the value and the importance of stakeholder and expert consultation, that information has to be kept in context. I'd certainly say in the European context, the risk assessments that I think FSC have been developing over the years, and Preferred by Nature as well, have been used by competent authorities in relation to the EU timber regulation as an example, as a way of understanding what are the likely conclusions that the companies they're inspecting should have in terms of their understanding of risks, as well as the actions they're taking to address those. So this is a tool which enforcement authorities, or these are tools that enforcement authorities, are relying on or using in different ways.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So we've just got one final question from the room. If I can ask you to be concise, please, because we're coming to the end of the
I'll try to be quick.
Thank you.
Lynn Pastrani from Earthside. I think it's all important and well and good to have information on risk levels on the regional level and all of that. But in the end, it goes back to geolocation in a way, because it needs to be, we need to test the risk of compliance with legality and deforestation on a specific plot of land. So I guess my question is how is that also going to be addressed? Or is it kind of focusing on that regional level, and then companies still do need to do that additional step on assessing the specific risk on a specific plot of land in terms of documentation on the validity of those documents and all of these kind of things? Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. So as complementing also Jennifer's previous answer, the Risk Information Alliance will not focus on that. But of course, this must be done. It's a requirement of the UDR. But I think it's possible to combine, what you do as, now you mitigate, you assess and mitigate the risk through the Risk Information Alliance, plus the other technological tool for geolocation. Just an example, I not necessarily want to speak about FSC, but as the organization I know the most. In our case, for the solution where we are providing, we are essentially decoupling, there is the part of the new generation of risk assessment aligned with the indicators part of the UDR, plus offering traceability in order to support geolocation, so that data is passed through the various steps in the supply chain in a secure and immutable way. So I would say, but feel free to correct me if you think differently, not necessarily part of the lines, but it's something that can be easily complemented through our system and technology. Yeah.
I would also quickly add, I'd also just quickly add to that. While I think the geolocation data is really important and will be critical, I don't necessarily think that it's always necessary for supply chain decision making. For example, if you know that you're sourcing from an incredibly risky area, you might not need the geolocation data. You just decide that you're not going to source from that period. So I think this is getting at that just first level of decision making, where maybe you haven't even procured a product yet. You are in that early stages, and so you're trying to decide, and trying to figure out where a country is even sourcing from at just country of origin level. And a company may decide, this company or this supplier is sourcing from this region within this country. We're not even going to go there. We're not even going to go through the steps of trying to geolocate because we know it's too risky. So it kind of addresses that first level. And then, once you decide to get deeper, then you can get that geolocation done.
I'm going to use your mic because mine keeps breaking. So we've come to the end of the session. So thank you everyone for being here, both in person and also online. And a very big thank you to our panel for presenting and providing us with a really interesting end of the day on the Thursday. So thank you, and a big round of applause. And if you would like to follow along with what the Risk Information Alliance are doing, direction of travel, next steps, please do visit the website. You can see the link on screen. And also, if you've got any further inputs, or if you'd like to engage with them further, please do reach out to them at info@riskinformationalliance.org. So thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of the day. So thank you.